It's Tuesday morning, September 21st, 2021. First things first. Just this past weekend, I returned the Ram 3500 camper to the OK 4-wheel drive guys, and I got my Jeep RNG back. Huge shout out to Juniper Overland in Denver, Colorado for babysitting my Jeep for 2 weeks. When I got it back, RNG seemed to be gleaming a little bit more than usual, or just gleaming at all, so they must have cleaned it off while it was there, and they didn't have to do that. So thanks, Juniper, for restoring a little bit of RNG's luster and making it look a little bit less like a barn find. On Saturday, Shannon, Finnegan, and I devoted the entire day to driving. We left Buena Vista, Colorado bright and early in the morning, and we spent 10 hours driving to get here, to Flagstaff, Arizona, in one day. We are in the area to attend Overland Expo West, which is ramping up on Thursday, 2 days from now. Since the event is so close at hand, in addition to the need to do laundry and life maintenance, I won't be going into the field this week, so adventure is not afoot. So this, unfortunately, will be a shorter episode just because I don't have that much time. I do, however, want to take time to go over my GPS workflow, which is something that I'm asked about often. Every week for close to 5 years now, I travel to new places, I explore, I record my findings on GAIA GPS, and then I make that data available to my Patreon subscribers. I very intentionally explore lesser-known areas because I believe that there is as much or sometimes more charm and adventure than a lot of the popular tourist destinations in the backcountry. Four-wheel drive adventure to me is secondary to pure exploration. I love not knowing where the road goes. In fact, in the late 1990s, before this overlanding boom, I was an avid recreational four-wheel drive enthusiast. I would go to the off-road parks like Paragon and Roush Creek, and I'd explore all the trails. Eventually, it was just the same trails over and over again, and my interest in four-wheel drive recreation waned for a little bit. But then this nebulous thing called overlanding came about, and it kind of gave four-wheel drive adventure more interesting spin for me, with an emphasis on extended travel, exploration, self-sufficiency, and I got hooked. Anyway, that's a little bit of background, but I also geek out over GPS navigation. I love tracking my position on a moving map, recording routes, and marking points of interests, campsites. So in addition to making these videos, doing that is also a significant part of my weekly workflow. Whenever the Jeep is in motion during the video recording week, I'm also recording tracks on GAIA GPS. To keep things as simple and as streamlined as possible without slowing myself down during the week, I record 4 different types of GPS tracks. Every time the road surface changes, I stop recording one track and I start recording a new track. I record street tracks when I'm driving on any paved surface. After that, I record dirt tracks, which is any well-maintained, groomed dirt road suitable for any vehicle. After dirt tracks, we have 4x4 tracks, which are the ones that I like to record the most. 4x4 tracks are primitive 2 tracks, usually on native material that are mostly unmaintained. And just because I call it a 4x4 track does not mean that it's challenging, and it does not mean that it requires a high clearance vehicle. It just means that the road is rough and probably fairly primitive in nature. Finally, the last type of track that I record is my hiking track, and this is when I park the Jeep and set off to explore on foot. In this case, my smartphone is usually in my pocket, running GAIA GPS and recording my movement. I mark 2 types of waypoints on my GPS, and while a track log actually records your route and shows your movement, a waypoint marks a single latitude-longitude location, like putting a pin in the map. I mark every single campsite that I spend the night at, and I also provide a short description for that campsite. I note how many vehicles it can fit, if there's cell service, if it's primitive or developed. Campsites that I've spent the night at are the only thing that I provide additional details on. I would love to write detailed descriptions for everything, some of the four-wheel drive routes and hiking trails that I found, but to add rich information like that can become very, very time-consuming. For all waypoints and tracks, I use a naming convention that helps me identify what state or province they're in, just at a glance. I use a two-letter abbreviation suffix at the end of every single waypoint. So if I mark a campsite in Colorado, it's usually named camp.co. If I mark a campsite in Utah, it's camp.ut. So depending on what piece of software I'm using to view my GPS data, I can run a search for .pa to see all tracks and waypoints in Pennsylvania. One challenge that I'm having with my GPS data is that there's so much of it that it is very hard to organize, and if I try to display a lot of it at one time on any device, it usually brings that device to its knees. Meaning this old iPad will slow down to a crawl if I try to display too much of my data at one time. I don't think most GPS devices or applications expect the consumer to record navigational data in bulk, kind of like I do. So it's really become quite cumbersome, which is the primary reason that I organize all my GPS data by video episode of Venture Forward. If I package all my GPS data into a single week worth of travels, the data set is much more bite-sized and manageable, and it corresponds with the video. So you can watch the video and then look at the GPS data set and see, oh, it looks like he is right here along this four-wheel drive track. At the very end of the week, after I'm finished recording and the new episode of Venture Forward has been published, I sync all of my devices using GAIA GPS. So ultimately there's no fragmentation. I can use my phone to record a track, and that will appear on my iPad, and I can use my iPad to record a track, and that will then appear on my phone. I use GAIA GPS's web interface predominantly to manage the GPS data. So once the data is synced from my devices, I go into GAIA GPS's web interface and create a folder for whatever Venture Forward episode the data corresponds with. Then I select all the tracks and waypoints from that episode's time frame and add it to the appropriate folder. Once all the data is added to the respective folders, I go in and find all of the camping waypoints and make sure that each camping waypoint has a short description. And then when that's done, I go into the episodes folder on GAIA GPS and select an option to download a GPX file for that folder. When you download a GPX file, you're essentially downloading a copy of your GPS data in that folder to your local computer. With the GPX file, the data is now in a portable format that you can share with others, and you can also use it to import the GPS data into other devices or other GPS applications. It's that GPX file, or a variation of it, that I put on Dropbox and make available to my Patreon subscribers. I share the GPS data on Dropbox instead of on GAIA GPS because to share it on GAIA GPS makes the assumption that everyone is using GAIA GPS. I am a GAIA GPS affiliate. It is an essential tool for me, and I personally believe there is no better GPS solution for backcountry navigation. But I do not want to make the assumption that you want to run GAIA GPS, which is why I share my GPS data on Dropbox in a device-agnostic format. Alright, so this episode kicks off a new chapter, and I apologize again that it's such a short and irregular episode, but with Overland Expo West upon us, I need to jam this out pretty quickly. We are out of Colorado and on the move. We're starting to think of where we want to be when the cold weather arrives, and we are eyeballing the West Coast, going north first, and then as things cool off, heading our way south. But after Overland Expo West here in Flagstaff, we don't have any more events lined up for the rest of the year, so adventure will be afoot. Again, if you're attending, I hope to see you at the event this weekend in the Ursa Minor booth. Thanks for following along, and I'll catch up with you again next week.